If you've been watching the news this week, you will notice here in April of 2020, the government released several photos from the Pentagon of UFOs. Oh my, the truth is out there somewhere. Now, if you're old like me, you can remember a time when we were fascinated by UFOs in fiction with a series called The X-Files. And that had a purported group in the government who are also looking for aliens. And of course, one of the things that happens over and over and over again throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century is the idea that aliens have abducted people and aliens are around and aliens are among us. Or maybe that there's just life somewhere out there that we can connect with through no other means than electronically and all of that. Of course, the truth is out there somewhere. We have to sort of figure out where and what and who and why and all of that fun stuff. But I have a feeling that the aliens are going to leave us alone for this lecture. This is our final formal lecture for ASTRO 102. So probably it's safe to take the tinfoil off. And it's probably safe to take away these security glasses as well. So fun stuff. I appreciate your work in the class so far. The next few weeks will be extra credit videos, so please stay tuned for those. And I'll have some extra assignments for those as well. We have a new lab this time, and then we'll have one more lab that comes up next week as well. So that'll round us out for the labs. And then you also have a final project. So that's what's on the docket for the rest of our term here. If you have any questions, again, let me know. If you have, sorry about that. If you have any need to connect with me on Zoom, remember I do have Zoom times every day. Also, I'm happy to arrange for a special Zoom time just for you, so let me know. But otherwise, let us go back to our usual thing here where we're going to try to get it to share the screen. And let me see. Doesn't always want to work, but we will give it a try. Share screen. There we go. We don't need that one. And I don't want to leave the meeting. We're just starting here. So, life in the universe. The truth is out there somewhere. We will start. When I was taking Astronomy 101 and 102 35 years ago, we did not have this chapter. We did not have really any idea except the very basics of a rudimentary kind of a thought about what might be required for us to have life in the universe. Now you can get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate in something called astrobiology. And astrobiology is a field where they have put a lot of different things together. You study biology, chemistry, geology, astronomy, physics, mathematics, and even more than that, geology is also important. So this is one of those areas where everything is coming together in terms of figuring out how all the sciences work so that life can be supported, and more importantly, perhaps, how life starts. There are various places in our own solar system where we're looking for life actively. Those include Mars and Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter. Those are the top two places outside of the Earth that are likely to have life. But recently, there was an article in one of our magazines, I believe it was Sky and Telescope magazine, that talked about the top 10 places in the solar system likely to have life. And I will confess, I wasn't even sure there were 10 places that might likely have life. But it included places like Pluto, and it included places like comets. So you never know, because the three main things we need for life are carbon, water, or a liquid. We think it's water, but there's a field, an area of thought that thinks you could have some other liquid as well, and an energy source. And of course, we put those together into astrobiology. We can do astrobiology here on Earth as well by looking at some of the extremophiles. which are things that grow up in very, very cold areas, like the purple and pink moss that will tend to grow in Antarctica inside of glacier areas, or extremophiles around volcanic vents that seem to defy how hot can get and still have life. We have questions that we ask constantly. Are we the only ones in the universe? If we are, do we need to be more protective of ourselves? Isn't that an ethical question just in and of itself? But if we don't have any alternatives beyond the Earth, doesn't that become even more important for us? And what would be our response if we actually found the universe had life everywhere? Would that somehow make us less special? Would that devalue what's happening here? I argue no, but that's okay. We do find when we're studying comets, and right now there are a couple of comets up there as well that we're studying. Hyakutake here was one such that we studied up close and personal, and found that it had organic compounds. Now, an organic compound is anything with carbon in it. And quite frequently, the coating on top of our comets tends to be a darker, denser material. It's not just a white, fluffy snowball. And that will quite frequently have some kind of carbon-based residue on it. We found that in lots and lots of comets. So the building blocks of life are out there. When we're looking at life, however, we're often not just looking at sort of microbes and carbon compounds. We're looking at life. It's like, how do we come together as to big sort of structures with intelligence? And how can we figure out the world around us? Well, of course, in the universe, we have lots of different things that are out there that are areas that we can tell that are huge, much larger than our solar system, that are just filled with carbon-based compounds. Not carbon-based life necessarily, but carbon-based compounds. We have vast nebulae, areas of gas and dust, that have methane and ethane and other kinds of compounds. There's one that has almost pure alcohol for as far as the eye could see if you were in the middle of it. So when we're looking at life, we're looking at a particular kind of coming together of physical and chemical processes. So how do we define life? We need to sort of figure out what we mean when we mean that. Well, they need to be organic. So far, we haven't found any life here on Earth or anywhere else that we would classify as life that doesn't have carbon. There's a school of thought that maybe silicon could also work. Which chemicals we use becomes important because they have to be able to combine and recombine and change and grow. If you're dealing with things like neon or argon or other kinds of things like that, that's not going to happen because they don't combine with anything. That's why they're called noble gases. Noble gases are just sort of inert. They don't do much along the way. Carbon is the most creative of elements out there. It will do almost anything with anything that's out there. So it does quite a bit. So we call those organic molecules. There's a whole body of chemistry simply called organic chemistry. After you take regular chemistry in college, you'll go on to take organic chemistry and spend the rest of your life in those classes learning all about carbon and still not be close to what could be the fullness of all of these things happening. When we think about living things, we also think about those changes I mentioned, and we often call that metabolism. That can also change in ways that are unpredictable, and we call those mutations. So there are two different kinds of changes that are taking place here. We also think about reproduction. It doesn't do much for life if it's a one-shot deal, if it's a one-time thing only. So we tend to look for some kind of process where it replicates itself along the way. And then they tend to need to have some kind of sensitivity to the environment around them. Do they get hot? Do they get cold? Do they grow? Do they shrink? Do they die off? Depending upon what's happening in their changes of metabolism, changes in reproductivity, and other kinds of issues like that. So these are the 5 things. I just went through them, but there are all sorts of variations that are here. For example, reproduction. We know crystals can grow. Crystals grow and create new versions of themselves. That's not technically reproduction though, because it doesn't involve changing of DNA or RNA or other kinds of things like that. The ability to consume energy and produce waste products. Well, things can be on fire and do that. In fact, for a long time, philosophers thought fire might be something that is in fact alive. So we can see from each of these things, there are lots of organic molecules that aren't life, that aren't living. A charcoal briquette has organic molecules in it, but it is not in fact alive. Even when we set it on fire, then it looks like it's really alive. We've known about life on Earth in terms of our sort of studies into the prehistory of our planet for about 3.5 billion years. So that's about 1 billion years after our planet was formed. We have the evidence for earliest life, and stromatolites tend to be at these sort of structures here. We find them in Australia, we find them in Western Australia and South Africa. Those two places, now far away from each other, used to be attached as our global continent shift has taken them apart. We still have similar structures on both of them. These are the leftovers, sort of like clams and snails and other living things that make their own houses and leave stuff behind when they die. Stromatolites are these things that have built up over time from things that have made their own housing. Now, we live on a planet that is not too far from the sun and not too close to the sun. So we're not too hot, we're not too cold. We're in what we sometimes call the Goldilocks zone. We also call that the habitable zone. Notice our habitable zone here. Every star has one, by the way. The hotter the star is, the further out it's going to be. The cooler the star, the closer in it's going to be. So that becomes one of the determiners. How hot is the star will tell you where the habitable zone is. Well, our planet is just inside the habitable zone in the warmer place. Notice Mars here. Most astronomers, I don't know if I'll say most astronomers, I'll say many astronomers, believe that Mars is in fact in the habitable zone. As the sun slowly heats up, it gets actually more and more into the habitable zone. It looks like from our data on Mars that it had water and it had what we would consider to be life-friendly conditions billions of years ago. So chances are it was in the habitable zone then and still is. Notice Venus is in the too hot zone, but we suspect increasingly that once upon a time it was in the habitable zone as well. So and planets do change a little bit, especially in the early days where they are. Habitable zones, again, if you're in around a hot star, it's going to be a bigger zone further out. If you are around a cool star, you're going to be in a smaller zone in. One of the important things to note is these zones are circular. They are actually, in fact, spherical, but they are circular. They're based on the sphere of the star. If your planet orbit is a kind of a cigar-shaped one, if we have a planet that goes around like this, notice that sometimes it's going to be inside, it's going to be too hot, and sometimes it's going to be outside, it's going to be too cold. So a planet that's going to sustain life in the habitable zone would need to have a circular orbit or a near circular orbit like ours do. We're not technically circles, but we're close enough. We're well over 98% in terms of most of our planets. And when we look at life, we are looking at a large and complex body of variations. We have found life in, as I mentioned before, extreme conditions. We can find them in places that have no sunlight, that seem to have no minerals, that seem to have no real energy. We also, that's in Antarctica. We can find things that are in places where we would think that they would just be burning up. But again, if you're in a volcanic vent down here, you're not getting any sunlight at all. The sun never reaches down here at the bottom of the ocean, and yet there's still life that's there. So we have these theories that, especially on a place like Europa, which has ice all over, so no sunlight's getting through, but it has a heat source underneath in a liquid ocean, that there may be life, different kinds of strange life, probably according to our standards. But there may be life that's clinging on to those volcanic vents that are deep, deep within it. The interesting thing is Europa is not in the habitable zone, but it has carbon, it has liquid, and it has energy. Those are the three things that are important there. When we look at our types of life here on Earth, we see we have plant life, we have animal life, we have other kinds of life according to this big tree of life. But of course, we have lots and lots of life that grows and shrinks depending upon sunlight. And we have lots of life that changes according to the types of energy and climates that we have here. Here's an interesting spot with some different life. We have what's called photosynthetic bacteria that grows around our geyser areas. Again, you have heat, an energy source, you have liquid, and you have carbon, different kinds of things here. As it says, coloration shows the use of light energy. If you're looking at something that's blue, for example, that means the light, the blue light that hits it, we have Roy G. Biv hitting it, the blue is being thrown away. It's the other light that's actually being taken in. If you have something that is reddish here, then it's the reddish light, it's the Roy stuff that's being thrown away, and it's the other light that's getting it. So we have some interesting stuff that's happening in these different areas here. Here we have a river of acid, Rio Tinto, and we have some kinds of organisms that like this. There's some that don't, and there's some that do. So that's one of the things that we have to concern ourselves with when we're dealing with life. There's some life. If I eat something that's moldy and has all sorts of mold and bacteria and other kinds of things, that can do damage to myself. And yet at the same time, there are other things that can eat that, including the mold and the bacteria that absolutely love that environment. So what's good for one type of life may not be good for another type of life. Here we're looking at a sort of an aerial view of an area near San Francisco, and we can see different colorations that are happening here. Different types of life, different types of organisms are being generated in these environments here. So here we have some holes that are dug into the Martian soil. One of the things that we see underneath the top is the soil looks different. The top is almost like a rust coating that you get below the rust, not even very far down, and suddenly the types of material that we're seeing look different. So what else could be underneath there? Again, Mars is tied with Europa, I think, for the #1 place life is likely to be. Now, life on Earth tends to be is based, I won't say tends, on DNA, RNA. I guess I could say tens if you consider viruses life and other kinds of weird things that may not really have DNA. But when we're dealing with sort of DNA molecules, when we look at life here on Earth, everything has a structure based on these amino acids, based on these pieces that are here. We've not found anything that doesn't do that. We can actually make those amino acids very simply. And this is called the Miller-Urey experiment. And I'm going to see if I can find a video to put up for you in our environment here, in our Canvas environment. In fact, if you'll forgive me for a moment, I'm going to take out my thing here and write down Miller-Urey experiment video so that I will remember to find that and put it up for you to look at. There was a piece from Carl Sagan's Cosmos where he talks about this experiment, and I'll look for that piece in particular. What they did, again, what you need are carbon compounds, and they really simulated early Earth environments. So they added more than just carbon, but we have our carbon compounds that are down here. We need liquid and we need energy. So we take our liquid and our carbon compounds and other things that were in the environment of the early Earth. We put sparks in. That could be volcanic vents, that could be lightning bolts, that could just be regular sunlight over time. Put these things together and voila, we have amino acids. This is not life. We never had this experiment where we put this together and something crawled out of the beaker. We never had anything even turn into sort of basic bacteria kind of thing. You can do this experiment at home. You can do this experiment in just a regular chemistry lab, sort of 101 chemistry. And you can get these kind of materials that are the building blocks of life. But the building blocks of life are not life themselves. If I have a sort of stack of bricks and lumber outside, that's not a house. But I can put those things together and build a house. But you have to have the bricks first. You have to have the lumber first. That's what's happening here. And it was very simple to make. That's why we are also finding amino acids and other things on comets and out there in different environments in the universe. So this is fairly simple. The mystery is, how do these things come together and start making copies of themselves? So DNA is interesting. We have the Human Genome Project. We're trying to figure out all these different kinds of things. What makes one person different from another? What makes one animal different from another? You hear all of these sort of statistics, like 99% of this animal is like that animal, and yet they look like very, very different animals. We ourselves share a huge, huge percentage of our DNA with primates and other kinds of animals that are out there. That's always interesting, but how do we take the DNA and make it into something that is self-replicating? The span of life here on Earth is a very, very long one. Again, 3.5 billion years from our simple cells, the stromatolite kinds of structures, to us. We've only been around for a while. Human beings, in terms of modern human beings, Homo sapiens, sapiens, only about 50,000 years. We've had other humanoid forms for a longer time than that, but we're not talking about billions of years. So we're talking even 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs died out. We had small mammals beginning to form there. Mammals sort of took over as in one sense, the dominant structure, the dominant life structure on Earth. The truth is, we may not be so dominant as we think. Pound for pound, there's far more bacteria on Earth than there is in terms of the human race. Pound for pound, there are more insects on Earth than there are humans in the human race, by far, by a huge amount. So what do we mean by when we say we're at the top of the chain? So for a long time, things were anaerobic. When we're talking about aerobic, we're talking about breathing in, breathing out. Anaerobic, we didn't have a lot of oxygen in our atmosphere in billions of years ago. Keep that in mind if you build a time machine and want to go back 3 billion years. You're going to need to take your own oxygen supply. At a certain point, life began to breathe out this O2 because it would take in the carbon dioxide, of which there was a lot, and then return the oxygen out. And plants still do this. They breathe in carbon dioxide and they put out oxygen. And that's why it's important to keep things like our Amazon jungle and our Congo basin around the country of Zaire and other places that are rainforests forested, because we breathe there. But as we can sort of see in terms of how much oxygen is in the atmosphere compared to today, which we say is 100%. So there have been times where we've had more. There have been many times where we've had a lot less. This GOE is called the Great Oxygenation Event. This is when we have our sort of planty kinds of things beginning to have their protoformation and begin to put out oxygen. We have different kinds of things that have happened at time that have brought this back. We can see how geology plays an effect here. But then we have what's called the Cambrian explosion. And this is where we get plants in the modern sense. And this is where we get animals. And we get the great diversity of life because we have a lot more to work with that's here along the way. But when this happens, of course, anything that can't survive in a high oxygen environment died off. So we have some organisms that adapted to breathe this, but we had others that would then die off along the way. This is evolution. When we look out at other places in our solar system, we're looking again for oxygen, we're looking for carbon dioxide, we're looking for water, we're looking for carbon, we're looking for energy. This is Europa here. When we're looking at this one here, Io, lots of volcanic activity, no atmosphere, probably not a lot of liquid in terms of the sustainability of water. On the other hand, we have extremophiles here on Earth. Could there be something there? This is Ganymede and Callisto, may have some subsurface oceans. If they have subsurface oceans, they have subsurface energy. So they could possibly harbor life. They were on the top 10 list too. Europa has cracks in its surface that tell us there is water beneath here. We can tell the sort of chemical content of a lot of this from afar. And we can tell there's a lot of water there. So this is one of the #1 places. Europa along with Mars are both sort of pretty much tied in most studies for the #1 place for life. We are planning to have a mission to Europa sometime within the next quarter century to land in one of these fissures, one of these cracks that will look for the remnants of life, because these are cracks in the glacier, in the icy top of the moon. And what we're hoping is that water bubbled up from underneath in the cracks and may have brought whatever sort of residue of life into those. So we're going to orbit the moon for as much as we can until we find the newest of cracks, because they're going to have the most likely, most recent evidence of what's happening there. Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn, has geysers, sort of water volcanoes, and it's putting out this liquid stuff in such a large degree that this is probably what built the rings of Saturn. But if it has liquid water underneath that's spewing out, it has an energy source that's keeping it from freezing, because this is way out beyond the habitable zone. So it has water, it has energy. Does it have carbon? We think it does. We're reasonably certain that it does. A little bit of debate going on there. But if you have those three things, could we have life all the way out there? Then we also have Titan. We've actually landed on Titan. When we sent the Cassini probe out to Saturn, it orbited for more than a decade. It had a backpack on the back that detached and landed on Titan. This is one of the more dramatic and successful of our outer planet explorations. Titan has an atmosphere. Titan has liquid on the surface. If it has liquid on the surface, it hasn't frozen over, which means there is, in fact, energy there as well. Now, this is not liquid water. This is not liquid H2O. This is methane and ethane. But methane and ethane are both carbon-based substances. And we have that also in the atmosphere that we have here. So we have some oxygen, not a lot, but we have some. We have carbon, we have liquid, we have energy. Could we have life? Well, when we landed on the surface, we didn't see anything. We saw a lot of frozen boulders. Some of the frozen boulders were, in fact, H2O frozen boulders. But with all of these things together, chances are good that there might be something moving around in there, at least microscopically. Now, this is a long, long way from Earth. This is way out. We're 1 AU away. Remember, 93 million miles, we're 1 AU away. When we're talking about Jupiter and Europa, they are 5 AUs away. They're actually outside the habitable zone. When we're talking Saturn, we're talking 10 AUs away. When we're talking about Uranus, it's 20. When we're talking about Neptune, it's 30. When we're talking about Pluto, it's 30 even more when it's further away, when winter is coming. And yet, when you have water, when you have energy, when you have carbon, you can have life even outside of the habitable zone. So you can be this far away. This is one of the sort of pale blue dot images that was taken from the Voyager spacecraft as it was heading away from us. How do we figure out, based on views like this, that anything's happening on that dot? That becomes part of our interesting way of understanding what's happening. When we're looking at our own atmosphere, our atmosphere blocks certain things. Our atmosphere is comprised of different chemicals in it that let some things through and block other things along the way. Lots of visible light makes it through, for example. So most visible light is making it through. Most UV light is blocked, but we do have ranges where it comes in. We have spiky areas here in the infrared. Some is blocked completely, some comes through completely. This is important to us because it helps stabilize our temperature. It is called the greenhouse effect. And greenhouses are good. Runaway greenhouses are not good. When they sort of put on their running shoes and dart down the road, we don't like that so much, but we need greenhouse effects here. So this does give us a stabilized thing. But notice how much all of this white area here is light that is being blocked, either UV or visible or infrared. See, even just this little patch of visible light that's being blocked or being interfered with is why it's much better to have a telescope like the Hubble outside of our atmosphere rather than in the atmosphere. But we live in hope of having things out there that we might be able to contact and communicate with. The Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft back in the 1970s, early 1970s, were launched to Jupiter, Saturn, and then out. They are now outside of our inner solar system, outside of our outer solar system, into the Kuiper belt and heading towards the Oort cloud. The Voyager spacecraft also in the late 70s and early 80s then did the same trajectory. Voyager 2 actually went on to Uranus and Saturn, or Uranus and Neptune, sorry, after Jupiter and Saturn. But all four of these spacecraft are heading out into interstellar space. It'll take a very, very long time, tens of thousands of years before they come anywhere close to any other stars. But just on the off chance that they encounter something out there, we put on the Voyager, or on the Voyager spacecraft here, this golden record. Has lots of photographs, has music, has greetings and other audio material. Will the aliens know how to play a record? That's an interesting kind of idea, because I know people here on Earth who don't know what vinyl records are anymore. So we're hoping that if they're intelligent enough to capture the spacecraft safely and bring it in, they'll be able to figure out how to play this thing. This is a plaque that is sort of showing where all of our planets are. See, we've got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Oh, Pluto made the cut. Oh, hey, what about that? This was done obviously before Pluto's demotion. We are from the third planet, the third rock from the sun. This thing here shows where there are a lot of different pulsars. And pulsars are collapsed stars, as we talked about before, spin around very rapidly, putting out pulses. When we first discovered pulsars, we thought we were looking at cosmic GPS, and guess what? We can actually use them for that purpose. So this would tell an outside society where we might be if they could imagine this being in 3 dimensions and figure out what these hash marks mean. They're mathematically generated. How far away we are, and we're sort of between here and here and here and here, where they can sort of coordinate between those where we would be located. Stephen Hawking, by the way, said this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. We're telling people who may not have the best of intentions where we are, and even if they have the best intentions, one of the things that happened when the people came over from the old world to the new world is they brought smallpox and other things that the people already living here had no immunity to. 90% or more of Native Americans may have been decimated, not through any intentional effort, but just because they caught things they had no immunity to. We're living through a time right now where we can see how difficult that can be. We are still looking for life, mostly through what we call the SETI project. This stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where some people are looking for microbes, but some people are looking for messages along the way. This is a guy named Seth Shostak, and if I can find a video on Seth Shostak, I will put that up here as well. Let me write that down so I will remember to do that too. He is one of the primary people searching for extraterrestrial communications. He's not so involved in the microbe search as he is involved in the message search along the way. We've been looking at different kinds of wavelengths, different kinds of hoped for messaging systems that are out there. With different types of equipment at different times. We have all the way back to the 1950s and 1960, we were looking for messages coming from outside. Now we have more and more and better equipment along the way. We still haven't found anything along the way. The Allen telescope array, this is where Seth Shostak still works on things. 42 antennas sort of chained together, so you get this interferometry effect from them. This one, Frank Drake had the famous equation about how life may be likely to happen out there. Jill Tarter is someone who also worked in, I think still does, perhaps work in the area of SETI. She is the inspiration for the Jodie Foster character in the movie Contact, if you've seen that. Carl Sagan was the author of that book. Now, Drake's equation, which I mentioned before, is something that looks like this, looks rather funky, but in fact, it is a fairly simple concept. When we're trying to figure out the number of communication-capable civilizations out there, there may be civilizations out there, but if they can't communicate with us, we're sort of out of luck. If anyone out in the universe was trying to contact George Washington, well, he was a pretty intelligent guy, but he didn't have a radio and he didn't have a transmitter, so good luck getting through. The same is true for Julius Caesar, the same is true for any of the emperors of China, the same is true for any of the major religious figures, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or anyone else. All of these people, key to civilization, key to the history of humanity, not one radio between them. None of them had a radio transmitter or a radio device in terms of being able to pick up signals from outside. So for all intents and purposes, outside of our planet, no one would have known what was happening down here. So when we're looking for other civilizations, we're pretty much looking for someone who can communicate. If not directly with us, at least they're sending out radio waves. So we have to start with the number of stars. That is a number that grows and grows. Then we have to multiply that by the number of planets around those stars. So until very recently, this was about the only number we had, because we had no idea. When I was taking this class in the 1980s, the only planets we knew were the planets around our sun. We had absolutely no idea of anything else. It would be 10 years after I took this course that before we discovered our first planets in 1995. It was the first time we verified planets outside of our solar system. We'd seen a few before and didn't know what we were seeing. But we started verifying that. Since then, the number's grown and grown. So we now have a sense that pretty much every other star on average is going to have some planets. So this number, which is, say, 200 billion in our galaxy, and then we have to multiply that by the number of galaxies. But communication-wise, we'll stick to our own galaxy. So we'll say 200 billion in our galaxy. Multiply it by the number that have planets. Well, that's going to be about 50%. So that's still 100 billion planets. Then here's where it begins to get trickier. And this is where we begin to fall off with how many numbers there are. So we've moved up one number in my lifetime. We haven't reached this point yet. How many of those planets are in the habitable zones? Now, if you're outside of the habitable zone, like Europa or like Enceladus, chances are you might have microbial life, but you're not likely to develop any life that's going to build a radio telescope. So we're really looking for this. The answer to that is we don't know. In our solar system, 2 out of 8, so 25%. But again, you have to have a circular or near circular orbit, and we're finding lots of planets that are out there that have cigar-shaped orbits, which means they're going to go in and out, which means they're going to burn up and freeze, burn up and freeze. And that's not going to allow a life civilization to build up. So we're going to put this rather low. At the high end, we're going to say 25%. So we've now multiplied this. We've gotten from 200 billion to 100 billion. We want to take 25% of that. So we're going to say now we're at 25 billion. That's still a lot of stars. That is a lot of stars. I'll take 25 billion and be very happy. But then we have, the question is, how many develop life? Well, here, if Mars hasn't developed life, or we say it doesn't have life now, then that's 1 out of 2. So we're cutting it in half again. That's 12.5 billion. How many develop life that is actually complex enough to be intelligent? So how many of them can develop George Washington, can develop King Henry VIII, can develop Genghis Khan, or something like that? We don't know. We do not know the answer to this at all, not even a clue. And speaking of Genghis Khan, how many of these civilizations go on to wipe themselves out? How many of them have nuclear wars? How many of them destroy their own planets with pollution? How many of them destroy their own planets with biological weapons? How many of them succumb to different kinds of conditions that are out there? Sometimes of our own making and sometimes not. So these are the Drake equation. Now, there's another element in here, and the expanded Drake equation sometimes puts another variable in here between this one and this one. And this variable is that. Because in fact, you can destroy yourself before you develop radio telescopes, before you have that. The Black Plague, for example, in Europe killed 1/3 of the population. It could have just as easily wiped everyone out altogether. We also have another issue, which is you might be very, very intelligent, but you might be, that's supposed to be a whale. So I know it's a bad drawing, sorry. Whales are intelligent. Whales could be perhaps more intelligent than human beings, but guess what? They're not building radio telescopes. And we could leave them in the oceans and have their civilizations for thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of years, and they still might never develop anything electronic or anything transmitter-wise. So it's not only being intelligent and avoiding the catastrophe, but it's also being technologically adept enough and interested enough. People might not be interested in doing this stuff along the way. So there are 3 real possibilities. We might be the only one, or there might be very, very, very few that are out there, and they're so far away that we're never going to contact them. There might be, over here, the optimistic case. They're all over the place. They spring up at different times, in different places, in different ways, but it happens again and again and again and again. So this would be the idea that extremophiles rule. Doesn't matter whether you're on an ice planet or a hot planet, life finds a way. Let's quote Jeff Goldblum here. So then we have the interim case where there might be some, not too few, not too many, spread out. And of course, this would be hundreds among billions of stars. So that's not a lot to go on. Another part of that becomes, and another part we could insert actually in our Drake equation here, would be time. So we might have another variable in addition to the radio telescope here, but we also might have time. because we've only been around with radio telescopes for about 100 years. Human beings have been around, as your earlier thing said, for 50,000 years in terms of modern human beings. And we've been around a lot longer than that. Some go as far back as maybe 2 million years for humanoids. Notice how much of this time we did not have radio telescopes. And if we decide, whatever reason, this reason or another reason, to stop doing extraterrestrial stuff in the next 100 years, let's say we've given it another 100 years and then we shut off, that's only 200 years out of all of this civilization time for us to get things going. So we're looking for things, but we might not be looking at the right time. There may have been civilizations that lasted for millions of years, but they're gone now. There may be civilizations that are about to pop up, but they haven't started transmitting anything yet. So we do have different explorers out there. The Hubble is not really looking for SETI kinds of things, but we do have other things like the WISE Explorer here that could, in fact, clue into certain kinds of details. If we're looking for an industrial civilization, for example, we might look for pollution in the atmosphere. If we're looking for a technologically advanced civilization that can build things around their planets, then that might give off a kind of signature as well. So we do have some ways of searching for those. We're mostly looking at radio waves, however. Oops, come back. Because radio waves don't tend to be blocked the way other shorter wavelengths, especially visual light, tends to be blocked by gas and dust. We've talked about this before. It's called galactic extinction. So we look for radio waves. Will tend to take the information the farthest. But there's a lot of stuff out there. So we're constantly eliminating things. Okay, we found pulsars. Oh, hey, an extraterrestrial intelligence. Well, no, not really. Hey, we found this other signature over here that looks like, well, no, that's a star exploding. That's erupting. That's back and forth between different things that are eclipsing. We keep finding things that give us clues, and then we find a natural phenomenon explaining things. But when we're looking for things, we try to look for things. If we were trying to contact someone else, how would we be sending out information? So we look for things that might be the way we would expect them to be. We look in certain areas of the spectrum. Hydrogen, for example, which is a part of water, which is a part of life, gives off certain signals in certain areas. So we look for what we call the emission line. Remember our spectral emissions. When you run the light through a prism, you can get these lines. We look for this, and we look for a message encoded in something like this, like the prime numbers. So when we look for that stuff, we're looking for patterns. This is pattern recognition. And you can actually join the fun. You can turn over your computer, like when it's not actually working on anything you're using overnight. It can just be running the SETI program. Go to SETI at home and download a little thing, and they'll send you packets of information that your computer will process, and they'll send it back and say, okay, we found a bunch of X-ray stars over here, and we found a pulsar over here, but no one's running I Love Lucy reruns. So we've got all of those things. So we have questions, and one of them is the Fermi paradox. If there are lots of interstellar civilizations, extraterrestrial civilizations, and they're capable of space travel, and they're much more advanced than we are, why aren't they here now? Well, we have those pictures just a week ago. Are they already here? Chances are no. The Fermi paradox is also sort of a problem when we're dealing with the SETI search. Why are there not signals everywhere in the universe? Why are we not looking at this and this and this and this and this star and finding I Love Lucy reruns and other kinds of things? Perhaps the aliens are too smart and don't want us to know that they're out there. Perhaps they're using different kinds of signals. Here's an interesting thing to think about. It used to be, I'm old enough to remember, when you would set up a television, I have a television right over there, and you would build something outside your house that was very tall, made out of metal, and it would take in the signals. we still have a variation of that. Our cell phones are still wireless. We have different things that are transmitted, sort of a wireless kind of thing. But those are using a different kind of signal. Here's the thing about TV and radio signals. We used to broadcast a lot of things on by a certain method where it would leak out into the universe, and it would go out and out and out. So people could actually see the Honeymooners, and they could see I Love Lucy, and they could see Star Trek, and they could even see X-Files. But now we are in a digital age. Everyone who had those old antennas, for the most part, they don't work anymore. You have to get special adapters. You have to get all sorts of different kinds of things. The digital signals don't bleed out into the universe in the way our old signals used to do. So anyone who is watching may have suddenly seen the Earth sort of shut down and say, okay, what happened? And they might be looking at that Drake equation and say, did they finally do it here at the end? What was there finally a catastrophe? Was there finally a nuclear war or something? Because our signal shut off. So maybe we're looking out there, but other people are so advanced that you don't have the Netflix code, you can't watch their broadcasts. Or perhaps they don't exist. We just don't know. We don't know at all. So the truth is out there. Perhaps we'll find out where and what it is in the future. But again, I thank you for being part of our class. I will actually put up a couple of videos before the end, but this is our last formal lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing your final projects, and good luck with the rest of the labs.